Hi everyone, this is Kyle from the podcast, and I'm going to take a different approach to doing the film watch series. So normally with those types of videos, I make a huge long video once a year going over all the movies I saw for the first time that year. And it's fun to make, and it's really cool to put it all together and see the end product, but this past year, it took me a long time to put together, and it was something that I kept putting off, and I didn't entirely know when it was going to come out. It eventually did come out. I think I put it out in May sometime, and obviously those don't get a whole lot of views either because they're so long and because our channel's pretty small. I want to try something a little different. I want to try a new approach to this sort of thing, and I'm also going to experiment a little bit with video and audio being incorporated all in the same time. So hopefully this sounds okay, hopefully this looks okay. But it's going to be sort of a similar thing to the first time film watches, except it's going to be monthly. At least I'm going to try to have it be that from the get-go. We'll see if it actually pans out or not, but I am going to try to catch up to the movies that I watched this year, going month to month, to the point where eventually I do hit the month that I am actually on, and then upload those videos in a timely manner. But I guess the only way to figure out if this is going to be something that I can do a little bit quicker than the yearly videos, I'm just going to have to see how it goes, just to try it out. So here we are, and I have my list of movies that I watched all in January. So this is going to be January 2023 first time film watches. And I'm going to go in order of when I watched them, not necessarily the order of the score that I give them. And I'm not going to be as detailed about the movies or what they're about or who directed them, because some of them I don't even remember. Like, I don't remember who directed Congo from like 1996 or something, 1994. We're just going to kind of go into it. I'll put timestamps for each of the movies I talk about, just my thoughts, and yeah. We're just gonna dive in, dive deep, reach the bottom. And the first one we're going to start with, I kind of gave it away already, but it's Congo. And it stars Laura Linney, Tim Curry, and it's got a few other people. Came out in the 90s. It's like a kind of a sci-fi-ish movie a little bit, although it's more like jungle exploration adventure type of movie. It feels like it tries to incorporate a lot of stuff that works in like Indiana Jones or like different sort of like National Treasure before National Treasure even existed. Like, you know, just those sort of like archaeological exploration type movies with like a lot of myth behind it. And this film is bad. It's very bad. Like, Tim Curry is pretty goofy, although I will say he's the best part. They try to paint him as a villain in it, and it just seems to me like, other than being like kind of greedy, his character isn't really evil at all. The movie tries to paint him as like this like Eastern Russian bad guy, and it's really weird, and it doesn't justify him being a villain at all. And then the main character, the main guy, I don't even remember the actor who plays him. He's very stale and not a good leading guy at all, and he's just like a total wimp the entire time. Laura Linney is like all right. She's incredibly one note. The suits for the chimps are incredibly goofy, and there's a lot of editing choices that don't make sense, a lot of plot choices that don't make sense. Like, they incorporate an erupting volcano into it in order to add tension, and it doesn't feel organic in any way. It doesn't feel like it coalesces with what the movie's going for at all. And yeah, it's just really goofy, really stupid. I give that one a 2 out of 10. The next one is The Conjuring 2. So last year I watched the first Conjuring movie, and it's decent. It's okay. It's a solid horror film. It's very tropey and very predictable, and you can see a lot of things coming a mile away, but it's filmed competently, and I think that some of the scares are pretty creepy and effective. It is pretty jump scary, but overall it's a solid horror film. The Conjuring 2 is just a lot of the same from the Conjuring one, except it's somehow even more tropey and predictable. And it sets up a lot of other movies, like I think The Nun and obviously like Annabelle they showed in the first film. Yeah, I don't really remember much of that one. I just remember that just the whole time Lorraine Warren in the film is just reeling from using her powers too much, and it just gets annoying after a while. I can't remember if it's in this movie or the third one where they really hammer down on that. Like, she's really kind of losing it in terms of using her powers, but I don't know. It's just weird. It's just weird, man. That one I gave a 5 out of 10. It's not the worst thing. There's definitely things about it that I do like. Like, it is creepy in some points, and at other times it feels a little goofy. I do like some of the sort of like motion animation that they do, like stop motion animation. I thought was kind of cool, how they incorporate that. There's some stuff that's really goofy, like I said, like the kid in it just speaking like a possessed adult. I will always find that not very scary at all. It's just kind of funny because they say some dumb shit and they swear at you, and it's supposed to be like, oh, it's a little kid and they're swearing at you. Isn't that scary? It's like, not really. I've had that happen to me. It's not that scary. So yeah, 5 out of 10, Conjuring 2. The next one I watched was The Godfather. I actually watched The Godfather for the first time, and this is one we talked about on the podcast with Sam. So check that episode out if you want a big, long, meaty discussion. So because of that, I'm not going to touch on it for very long, but it's a great movie. There's a reason why I think it deserves having the title of one of the best movies of all time. And I think that for a movie that was made in like the early 70s, it's really well done. There's a lot of creativity behind the shots, and the editing's really impressive, especially when it crescendos in that last scene where they're in the church. I really like that, and you know, all the different events are happening. No spoilers here. The only thing that I had an issue with really was there was some, I don't want to say like fight scenes, but there's like one particular fight scene with the character of Sonny where he beats somebody up, and it is really bad. Like, it's just some really bad punching and kicking that's obviously fake, and it doesn't look real in any way. And that's the only really major thing that took me out of the movie. Otherwise, it was really well done. The acting's great, obviously. Marlon Brando kills it. Al Pacino's great. Like, all the casting and the characters and the acting is just really well done, and I enjoyed it. 9 out of 10 for that movie. Next one I watched is The Menu. So The Menu was one that I wasn't super interested in checking out, but I just decided to watch it just because I had free time. And you know, it's all right. It's fine. There's a lot of issues that I have with it. The first and foremost being that it's really on the nose. It's super ham-fisted in its message and its themes, that it just feels like a poor man's Midsommar almost, except Midsommar does a lot of things that are way better than this movie, incorporating a lot of like those similar themes. It's more akin to like, I don't know, maybe not necessarily Midsommar, but something where the whole metaphor is like, oh, rich people bad and they're out of touch and blah blah blah, and you know, food industry and everything, and it's all wasteful. And it's also like the notion of the critic versus the artist, and what right does a critic have to delve into a piece of art when they aren't the ones making the art themselves. And yeah, it's just very obvious about a lot of the themes. There's some shots that are kind of cool. Some of the way they present the food was really neat, and like some of the ideas, but it didn't really leave me with any suspense. I didn't really like any of the characters. I thought Anya Taylor-Joy was fine, except her character and the writing for her character was very one note. And a lot of the other side characters are just super bland. There's stuff that happens that it feels like it just goes that way because the script needed it to, and I don't know, it just wasn't my cup of tea, wasn't my cheeseburger. So that one I gave a 5 out of 10. It's okay. Next up was The Godfather Part 2. This one I absolutely loved, and I think it's safe for me to say that I enjoy it more than the first. And not that the first one's bad by any means, but This one is just a masterclass, I think, in both storytelling, characters, editing, the score that they use for it to make it feel as grand as it is. And I don't know, it just feels like it's a really good self-standing movie. Like, it can stand on its own two legs, kind of separate from the first one. Like, you can watch Godfather 2 not really knowing much about the first one, and you'll get a whole complete story. But it still acts as a really good sequel following the characters, and it makes sense where those characters go and what happens with them. And I think the way that it balances those two things is just super impressive, and that's why I love this movie quite a bit. So that one I gave a 10 out of 10. I think that's the first 10 out of 10 for the year, so that's exciting. Next up was Skinamarink. Skinamarink was a horror movie directed by Kyle Edward Ball. It was kind of a smaller thing that spread through word of mouth on the internet and became sort of a, I don't want to say like sleeper hit, but sort of, yeah. I really liked it. I thought it was suspenseful. I thought it was very immersive in the way that it presents a lot of the camera work and the visuals and the cinematography, just like the atmosphere that it builds. And I really love when horror movies and just movies in general delve into a way of filmmaking that is totally unlike a lot of what we see, especially in theaters. I was very surprised that this was playing in my local theaters specifically. Very pleasantly surprised. And I give it a lot of props because it's a lot different from what I normally see in terms of a horror movie and the way it presents itself. I think it's super cool. I can totally understand if someone watches Skinamarink and they don't get invested in it and they don't like it, because it is one of those movies where I think the conditions for watching it is so imperative to how you feel about it. Because if you watch it in like a crowded theater and there are people reacting to things going on and they're being loud about it and it takes you out of it, you're not going to enjoy the movie. Or even if you don't really like the way it's presented, like, that's totally fine. I completely understand that. You know, a lot of people sort of meme on Skinamarink, like they film a corner of their room and they're like, haha, a scene from Skinamarink. And I get that 100%. Like, it's that is a lot of what the movie is. But at the same time, I think that for me personally, it just sucked me in, and you know, I was fully invested and tense throughout the viewing experience. I want to watch it again at home in the dark, either completely by myself or with one other person, and I want to see how that experience compares to watching it in a theater and see how different it is. So for now, I gave Skinamarink an 8 out of 10. It might go up, might go down, but it's pretty solid 8 right now. I watched Out of the Furnace. It's a movie starring Christian Bale and Casey Affleck, and it's got Woody Harrelson in it also. He plays like the villain character. And it's about these two brothers, and one of them kind of like goes off on his own. He's not really responsible with himself, and Christian Bale's like the older, like wiser brother in a sense. This movie has such a feel to it that I can only describe as something like a Cormac McCarthy novel, where it's a sort of not roundabout way of telling this kind of story with these kind of characters, but it never feels like anything in this movie is direct. It always feels like things are sort of ancillary until they're important, and it's a lot of setup for things to happen at the very end. And it's enjoyable. I like the acting quite a bit. I mean, Christian Bale nails it. I think he's really good in pretty much everything I've seen him in. I don't think I've seen a bad performance from him, even from fucking Reign of Fire, that shitty dragon movie that came out in like 2002 or something. I really like Christian Bale in this, and I think Casey Affleck and Woody Harrelson are really good too. The cinematography isn't like anything super special. It's fine. The visuals are okay. It's competently shot, but it's nothing super unique or not anything that we haven't seen before. And I don't know, it's got a tone to it. It's got a sort of feel that gives it that it's almost like The Machinist in a way. It has sort of like an industrial backdrop and sort of a rustic, gritty, grimy feel to it that you get with a movie like this, or something that reminds me a lot of a story that Cormac McCarthy would have written. Rest in peace, Cormac McCarthy, speaking of which. There's some pacing issues, I think. Some of the plot and the structure of it's a little messy, and at points you just kind of wonder like where it's going, not necessarily in terms of like suspense, but more so in terms of like, all right, what are we getting on with this movie? Like, are things gonna happen? Like, are we gonna get any sort of payoff with the plot and the characters and how it's being told? But eventually you do get that, but it's a very kind of roundabout way of doing it. So I gave this one a 7 out of 10. I'd be curious how I feel on a rewatch. I don't know if I'll point it past that, though. Next up is National Treasure with Nick Cage. Yes, believe it or not, I had never seen this movie before until January of this year. And yeah, it's goofy. It's fun. Nick Cage carries it 100%. And I see why people like it, because, you know, I kind of dig it. It's a good time. It's a good, goofy Nicolas Cage time. I think it's funny in a lot of moments. There's some moments that don't necessarily hit, but it's a product of its time and very much inspired by Indiana Jones. Some of the action is a little goofy. It's not nearly as much of a spectacle as Indiana Jones. It's one of those things where Nick Cage carries a lot of it through the dialogue and especially his performance. You know, it's not necessarily like the action set pieces you're watching it for. It's just purely Nick Cage. But overall, it's a decent adventure flick. Probably lacks a lot of self-awareness, but I think that Nick Cage elevates it big time. Like, if there was somebody else playing that character, this movie wouldn't be nearly as iconic. So 7 out of 10 for that one as well. Next up, we've got Scarface with Al Pacino. After watching the Godfather movies, which I completely skipped over Godfather 3, which I'll get to after this. After watching the Godfather movies, I was curious how Scarface was, because Al Pacino, you know, being that character of Michael Corleone, has sort of kind of found himself, maybe not necessarily typecast, but enraptured in the mob movie world. You know, he's played a lot of criminals and mob bosses and things like that. And I was curious about Scarface because it's a movie that it almost transcends pop culture in a way. Like, everybody knows about Scarface, at least, even if you haven't seen it. And I watched it, and yeah, it's well done. It's one of those movies that doesn't really have any deep themes or meaning behind it. I think the biggest one is greed, obviously, and how power affects yourself and people around you. But I mean, they present that character, Tony Montana, as being consistently high energy the entire time. Like, there's no point where he really feels like he's a normal human being. Even at the very beginning of the movie, you can tell like something's off with this guy. That being said, I think that Al Pacino plays him really well, even if he is kind of one note and very similar throughout the entire movie. Like, there's really not much of a point where his character changes much at all. I think he plays him well, and I think it serves the purpose of the movie well, which is just to kind of show this very simple rise and fall of this character and this person in power. I think that some of the action is very pulpy, and it kind of helps it out. It's definitely sort of a product of its time. I didn't realize how 80s this movie is. Like, it's very drenched in like that 80s sort of like pop and music and the sort of bright colors. I mean, I guess it's set in is it set in Florida or California? I can't remember, but like one of those states where it's very like sunny and bright all the time, and there's just a lot of color going on in a movie where there's a shit ton of violence. So it kind of acts as a weird juxtaposition to the Godfather movies for Al Pacino being in this movie, where it's just really bright and colorful, and he's playing this totally different, bombastic, fucking cocaine-addicted character. But it's fun. It's a fun movie, and I think if you like mob movies, this one's a decent watch. It's not anything you gotta think about. It's not heady. It doesn't really give you much to chew on. You just watch it, and it also ends very abruptly too, if you're one of the few people who doesn't know how it ends. But yeah, it's very like consistent throughout the whole thing. So this one I gave an 8 out of 10. Next one, I almost skipped this one because I just looked over my notes, and for some reason my eyes just went, onto the one after. But The Godfather Part 3, speaking of which, this one, yeah, it's not nearly as good as the other two. And not nearly as good as the other two. Like, there's a significant drop in quality. That is to say, I don't hate the movie. I actually do like it. It is doing a few things that I think is it's well done. I like Al Pacino in it, even though a lot of the acting in it from him is just, he's going according to what the character is supposed to be, but I don't know. Some of it is just very, like, it's a lot of just him screaming and all that stuff. His character in the first movies, like the first two movies, especially the first one, was a lot more reserved and a lot more intelligent. It felt like he had a lot behind him that he could use in his repertoire. Whereas in this one, he just feels like some rich asshole who screams all the time. And it's not very compelling to watch in a movie like this, especially the third part in a supposed trilogy. And that's the thing with it too, is that this movie came out in 1990 when the other ones came out in the early 70s. So there's a huge disparity with time. It feels so disconnected from the other movies. Just not nearly as much investment into the plot as the other two for me personally. And I think what they tried to do is they tried to make it feel grand with like the church stuff and the Vatican and all that shit going on. But it doesn't feel earned. And I would be remiss not to mention Sofia Coppola and her really terrible acting. Like, there's a reason why her performance is memed on as hard as it is. And I don't even want to get started about the whole like cousin fucking thing in the movie. Like, that's just fucking whack. So yeah, that one I gave a 7 out of 10. I might be too generous with that one. If I ever watch it again, I might lower my score, but I'll have to see how I'm feeling when I view it next, if I view it next at all. I'm not in a fucking rush to do that in any way. The next one, I put a plural at the end of that because I'm just going to mesh them all together, because it's the Alvin and the Chipmunks Quadrilogy. So Alvin and the Chipmunks, Alvin and the Chipmunks the Squeakquel, Alvin and the Chipmunks Shipwrecked, and then Alvin and the Chipmunks the Road Trip. All of them are 1 out of 10. They're all fucking garbage. They're all terrible. The CGI chipmunks are just really ugly and unappealing to look at. The characters are super annoying. A lot of it feels like the purpose of it is product placement for different songs like Uptown Funk or Bad Romance by Lady Gaga. Like a lot of songs that were hot at the time, you know, they made it to like the Billboard Top 100 that year that the movie came out or something. Like, it's really fucking bad. And each of the movies is just so consistently terrible. And I'll be glad to never watch it again. I watched them as a joke because I posted an April Fool's episode with Larry the Cable Guy. So you should check that out if you ever want to hear like really my thoughts on it. Like, it's really just me. But yeah, no, don't even bother. They're just trash, garbage. Or they're the best movies ever and I'm just gaslighting you. Who knows? The next one is RRR. Is a Telugu language film that came out last year that won Best Original Song for the Oscars this past year. So that was cool. That was cool to see. Yeah, no, I love this movie. I think that it is just overall pure fun and enjoyment. And there doesn't feel like there's any sort of cynicism or malice behind it. It doesn't feel like there's any like corporate bullshit. It just feels like a really good buddy adventure movie that is super self-aware in what it is, but at the same time, it feels like there's passion behind it. It feels like there are people that are making this movie that actually give a shit about entertaining you. And I appreciate that so much about it. I watched it again this past month, actually, on an airplane, and I showed Megan the movie for the first time. I kind of wish I had shown her on just a normal TV, but she loved the movie, by the way. She loved it. And I think it's one of her favorite movies now. So I'm happy to have introduced that to her and to have her experience it. So I gave this one a 9 out of 10. I highly suggest you watch it if you haven't already. Blah, blah. I highly suggest you watch it if you haven't already. It is one of those movies where I think most people who watch it will get some kind of enjoyment out of it. Next up, we have Camp Rock. The Disney Channel movie starring Demi Lovato and the Jonas Brothers. And yeah, it's cringe. It's pretty cringe. The acting's cringe. The characters are cringe. The writing's cringe. A lot of the music is cringe. It's a musical, so it's got a lot of songs by the Jonas Brothers and Demi Lovato. There's not much else I can say about it. It's just bad. We watched it to make fun of it, and that's exactly what we did. We just roasted the shit out of it. There's that scene where the girl plays the keyboard and she does this, and it's fucking terrible. 1 out of 10. I'm moving on to the last one on the list of the films I watched for the first time in January 2023, and that is Twister with Bill Paxton and I forget the actress's name, but Mac is going to be yelling at me at this point. Yeah, I rewatched it for the podcast because Mac recommended it, and I really didn't connect with it all that much. And what's funny is I had actually seen it before. You know, I've seen this movie before, but I never had it logged or anything. I never had it rated. And yeah, I didn't think it was good. I think a lot of the dialogue is really weak. A lot of it just feels like there's not really any real characters. It's just very situational, and you're following these characters in a situation. Like, the most tension you're supposed to get, besides the twisters themselves, which a lot of the special effects are not good, is between Helen Hunt. That's who it is between Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton. And I didn't care. I didn't care about their relationship, really. I didn't care about the group. I didn't think that any of them were something that I gave a shit about. Maybe the only one kind of was Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, but even then he was like super one note. Everyone in this movie's one note, and I don't know, I just didn't really latch onto it. I didn't remember it as fondly as the first time I watched it years and years and years ago. But I will say there's a lot of cool stunt stuff with the vehicles. I liked a lot of that. There's a lot of cool practical effects, like them basically tearing apart a whole barn and like these houses. Like, it seems like they built these sets specifically so they could destroy them. So I enjoyed that. A lot of the sound design I really liked. You know, the twisters going through and adding sort of that atmosphere to the movie, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. But overall, I didn't really connect with it nearly as much as I probably would have liked to. But who knows? Maybe I'll watch it again and I'll find something in it that is worth checking out. So, but for right now, 4 out of 10. And that is it for the January movies that I watched for the first time in 2023. So, like I said, we're going to see how this goes. We're going to see how this meshes together, and if it meshes together at all. But if you guys want to see this again, let me know. I plan on doing one for February, probably in like a couple weeks or so. I'm going to try to release this bi-weekly also, as well as the podcast. That's going to be my attempt anyway. I'm not going to make any promises, but that way I can catch up to being in the current month when I release another video like this. So then I only have to do it once a month, and that'll be a lot easier for me to do. But for right now, I'm going to try to catch up with each month by going bi-weekly. So luckily, we're also only like halfway through the year, so I don't have to do like 12 whole months, like super compact and close together. So that's pretty nice. But yeah, just let me know what you think of this video. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. I'm going to try this new format out, this video audio thing going on, see how the editing process goes. So let me know, and I will read your comment, and hopefully you're nice to me, because I will cry if you're not. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.